The sun rose over the village with a pale, sickly light, as though it too had been weakened by the plague. Morning had once been a sign of new beginnings, of hard work and familiar routines, but now it felt like a cruel reminder that the world was still moving forward while so many lives had come to an abrupt end. A thin mist hovered over the dirt roads, dulling the outlines of houses and making the entire village seem unreal, like a place halfway between life and death. Doors remained tightly shut. Wooden shutters, once left open to welcome fresh air, were now barred as if against an invisible enemy. No one greeted their neighbors anymore. Eye contact itself had become dangerous, not because it spread the disease, but because it carried questions no one wanted to answer. Had your family survived the night? Were you next? Inside a small, cramped house near the edge of the village, a mother sat beside her young son on a straw mattress. The room smelled of sweat, smoke, and crushed herbs. She had burned rosemary and sage all night long, her hands shaking as she fed the dying fire, believing the smoke might push the sickness away. Her son's breathing was shallow and uneven, each breath a quiet struggle. His skin burned beneath her touch, so hot it frightened her, and yet she could not pull her hand away. To stop touching him felt like surrender. Dark swellings had formed beneath his arms and along his neck, painful lumps that the villagers whispered about in fearful tones. Everyone knew what they meant. She pressed a cloth to his forehead, whispering prayers she barely remembered learning as a child. The words tangled in her throat, spoken out of habit more than faith, because faith had become difficult when death ignored both the innocent and the guilty. Outside, the sound of a church bell rolled slowly through the air. One strike, then another. Each toll marked another soul gone, though no one knew exactly whose. The bell rang so often that the villagers had stopped counting. It no longer shocked them, it only deepened the heavy feeling in their chests. The mother froze with every sound, her heart pounding as she wondered if the bell would soon toll for her child, or for herself. Down the narrow street, two men moved slowly, dragging a wooden cart across the ground. Its wheels creaked with each turn, the noise echoing between the houses. One of the men called out in a voice stripped of emotion, worn thin by repetition. "Bring out your dead." He did not shout. There was no need. Everyone heard. Everyone understood. The words floated through the air like a verdict. No doors opened immediately. Families waited, listening, gathering courage. Finally, one door cracked open, and a shape wrapped in a rough blanket was placed onto the cart. The men did not look inside the bundle. They had learned not to. They simply took it and moved on, leaving behind a home that felt emptier than silence. Behind shuttered windows, eyes watched every movement. People clutched their children tightly, pulled scarves over their faces, and held their breath as the cart passed. A single cough from inside a house could send neighbors into panic. Trust had vanished. Kindness had become dangerous. The plague had not only attacked bodies, but had torn apart the invisible threads that once held the village together. The air was thick with strange smells. Smoke rose from multiple homes where people burned herbs, old books, and sometimes furniture, anything they believed might cleanse the air. Some claimed the sickness traveled on poisoned winds, others blamed foreigners, sinners, or even the stars above. No one truly understood. Fear filled the gaps left by knowledge. A few villagers dared to step into the street, tying cloths soaked in vinegar around their faces. They walked quickly, avoiding contact, moving as though the ground itself might betray them. Once, a baker would have opened his shop at dawn, the smell of fresh bread comforting the whole street. Now the bakery stood abandoned, its door hanging open, flour scattered across the floor like white dust on a grave. At the edge of the village, a small group was already leaving. They loaded carts with whatever they could carry, blankets, tools, sacks of grain, and did not look back. Some left sick relatives behind, telling themselves it was mercy, or survival, or God's will. Guilt followed them like a shadow, but fear drove their feet forward. Staying felt like a death sentence. Inside the small house, the mother leaned closer to her son as he stirred weakly. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, his lips cracked and dry. He tried to speak, but only a soft sound escaped. She bent close, tears finally spilling down her face, and told him stories of better days, of summer fields, of laughter, of a future she could no longer picture. She spoke to keep him awake, and perhaps to convince herself that life still mattered. As the sun climbed higher, the mist slowly lifted, revealing a village scarred by loss. The Black Plague had turned ordinary mornings into trials of survival, where waking up was both a blessing and a curse. Every breath was counted, every sound feared, and every sunrise brought one question that haunted everyone the same way: who would still be alive when night returned? Night settled over the village like a heavy blanket, pressing down on the rooftops and narrow streets until even the wind seemed afraid to move. Darkness no longer brought rest. It brought questions, dread, and the long hours of waiting for dawn. Small points of candlelight glimmered behind shuttered windows, the only sign that people were still alive inside. Each flame felt fragile, as if a single breath could extinguish it, just like the lives it illuminated. The church stood at the center of the village, its stone walls dark and cold under the moonlight. One by one, figures slipped toward its doors, heads bowed, cloaks pulled tight. They came quietly, avoiding touch, yet driven by desperation stronger than fear. The bell no longer rang at night, it had already rung enough during the day. Still, everyone could hear it in their memory, echoing in their minds as they walked. Inside the church, candles cast trembling shadows across the walls, making the carved saints seem almost alive. The air was thick with wax, sweat, and anxiety. People knelt tightly packed together on the stone floor, even though they knew the danger of closeness. Tonight, salvation felt more important than safety. Mothers clutched their children, husbands held their wives, and some sat alone, having lost everyone else. The priest's voice broke the silence, low and strained, as though he too was carrying an invisible weight. He spoke of sin, punishment, and divine anger, repeating ideas that had spread almost as quickly as the disease itself. Some believed the plague was God's wrath, sent to cleanse the world of corruption. Others believed prayer was the only shield left. As the priest spoke, heads bowed lower, and sobs echoed softly across the stone floor. A woman near the front whispered confessions under her breath, listing every small wrongdoing she could remember, terrified that she might miss something. An old man stared ahead without blinking, his hands shaking as he gripped a wooden cross. He had buried his entire family in less than a week. Faith had not saved them, but abandoning faith felt even more terrifying. When the prayers ended, no one rushed to leave. People lingered, as if the church walls might protect them a little longer. Stepping back into their homes meant facing the silence again, facing the sick, or the empty beds where loved ones once slept. Slowly, they separated, careful not to touch, offering nods instead of embraces. Comfort now came from distance. Outside, the night air felt cold and sharp in their lungs. From the far end of the village came a sound that made many freeze, a steady rhythm, not of bells, but of footsteps. Torches flickered in the darkness as a group emerged, their faces shadowed, their movements intense. These were the faithful punishers, men and women who believed pain was the way to end suffering. They walked barefoot over stones and dirt, chanting prayers between sharp gasps of breath. With each step, they raised whips and struck their own backs, the sound echoing through the empty street. Blood stained their garments, yet their faces held determination rather than pain. They believed every drop of blood brought the village closer to forgiveness. People watched from doorways and windows, their emotions torn. Some felt hope rise in their chests, believing these acts might finally persuade God to lift the plague. Others felt fear deepen, wondering if such extremity signaled how close the world truly was to ending. Children hid behind their parents as the group passed, the sound of whipping and chanting burning into their memories. Farther down the street, a young man knelt beside his sister's body, candles arranged in a rough circle around her. He had no priest, no words left to say. Earlier that day, she had still been speaking. Now she lay still, her face peaceful in a way life had not been for weeks. He whispered goodbye into the night, knowing the body collectors would come before morning. Grief did not wait politely, it settled in immediately and refused to leave. As the night deepened, the flagellants moved on, their chanting fading into the distance. The village fell quiet once more, broken only by the occasional cough, a soft sob, or a prayer spoken into darkness. In many homes, people lay awake fully dressed, afraid to sleep too deeply. Dreams, when they came, were filled with fever and loss. Some stared at the ceiling, counting breaths. Others watched the door, convinced the sickness would arrive by morning. Even those who felt healthy feared their own bodies, afraid of the smallest ache or warmth. Life had become a constant state of waiting, waiting for symptoms, waiting for bells, waiting for carts in the street. Above the village, the stars shone clearly, untouched by the suffering below. They offered no answers and no comfort. As candles burned low, people whispered final prayers, promises, and apologies, unsure if they would have another chance. Life during the Black Plague turned every night into a test of faith and endurance, where survival felt uncertain and hope was as fragile as the flame flickering beside the bed.